and welcome to EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. I'm Catherine Hadro in our Washington, D.C. studio. Thank you for joining us for our Thanksgiving special broadcast. In this show, we will bring you empowering stories completely dedicated to our gratitude for life. But we begin this show with a quick reminder that you at home can do something right now to advance the pro-life movement and to foster a culture of life. Here's how you can do that. Go to your computer or smartphone, open up your internet browser, and type in prolifeweekly.com. Each week, we update this website with the most important pro-life action you can take at that time. You can find out what this week's call to action is by visiting prolifeweekly.com. Again, that's prolifeweekly.com. For our first story in this broadcast, we hear about a young woman's lasting legacy of love. Next month marks 4 years since a Catholic Virginia family lost their precious daughter to a still unknown medical condition. It was a short life filled with many challenges, but one this family would never take back.
Are you laughing? What's so funny? When she passed away at the age of 22, she was 5'8", beautiful young woman, but she was the developmental age of a 7-month-old child.
The day Courtney Elizabeth Lindbergh began her life in the Catholic Church in 1992, she also began a life with a mystery diagnosis.
Everything was fine until she was 5 weeks old. And on the day of her baptism, she actually had the first of grand mal seizure. And she had multiple grand mal seizures every day for the remainder of her life.
Courtney's parents, Mary and Jerry Lindbergh, went straight to the emergency room as doctors considered possible causes, from a brain tumor to meningitis. The tests continued, and at 7 months old, the doctors thought Courtney might have what's called West syndrome. But their next move did more harm than healing.
When she was 7 months old, we gave her this medication, and what we didn't know is Courtney's allergic to steroids. And so within 36 hours, it's a steroid.
She looked like the Michelin Man.
Yeah, she blew up, her brain went septic, her brain swelled, she lost her sight, she lost all development that she had at that point, which was, she was 7 months old, so she was actually ahead of the game, even with the medication she was taking. So she was 7 to 9 months in development, and at that point, she never ever superseded that.
The search continued as Courtney's parents and older brother desperately sought to heal her.
We spent the first 7 years of her life really seeking answers, trying to fix her. That's what we kind of call it. We were trying to fix her.
After 7 years losing faith in medical interventions, the Catholic family looked for a miracle and traveled to the Lourdes Grotto in France. Because of neurological issues, Courtney had little control of her hands, and they were typically clenched in a fist. So it shocked her mother when Courtney suddenly grabbed a statue of Our Lady as she was being lowered into the cold Lourdes water.
As I'm looking at Courtney, she took Our Lady, put her over her heart, and with her fisted hand, placed the other hand there and did not move from that position. That's the only time in her life that ever happened.
Then, when it was Mary's turn to go into the miraculous spring waters, the prayer she had been practicing suddenly escaped her.
They were asking me, what is the problem? The women were. What could they pray for as they dunked me in the water? And I stood there and I heard a young woman's voice, and I thought it was one of the women. And the only word I heard her say was acceptance. And so I opened my eyes and I looked around, and they asked me again, and I was really confused, and I said acceptance.
Meanwhile, Jerry Lindbergh had a similar experience.
So I went in the water at the same time, but she didn't know till we talked about it.
I didn't know that, yeah.
I said the exact same word, and I'm like, acceptance, what does acceptance mean? I don't even know what that means. What does that mean?
It took the Catholic couple 4 years to unpack what had happened. When waiting in yet another hospital room, Mary reflected on what she heard at a women's retreat about healing.
The third point was acceptance, that healing would not happen this side of heaven. And it would only happen when you entered into the gates of heaven, into our Lord's arms. So here we were in a hospital, watching this number on a board, seeing where she was in the neurosurgery process. And it just sort of landed on me. Acceptance. And I looked at him and I kind of knocked his coffee out of his hand. And I said, this is it. This is what it is. And he said, I don't understand. I said, we heard a young woman's voice. Who went in the water first? And he just looked at me. Yeah, kind of like that. And he said, Courtney went in the water first. I said, yeah.
Mary and Jerry Lindbergh believe it was Courtney's voice they heard in Lourdes, and their suffering servant of a daughter was sending a message.
Everything changed. We brought her home, and we lived boldly from that point on because we didn't know how much time we had.
The Catholic couple stopped trying to fix their daughter and finally accepted the life she had.
You can use your hands, silly girl.
The dignity of her personhood became paramount to us because she had a job to do, you know.
She had to evangelize.
She had to evangelize.
The Lindberghs started to evangelize too, as Mary put pen to paper and shared Courtney's life on her blog, social media, and even in a forthcoming book.
Are you having a good evening?
Courtney's witness, her parents say, sends a countercultural message on love.
She taught us how to love without condition. There was nothing she could do to earn our love. She wasn't going to be a prima ballerina. She wasn't going to be a scholar athlete. She wasn't going to get married and have children. We knew that. She just was Courtney.
It was a love-filled life. And then, around Courtney's 22nd birthday, doctors told the family her time was coming to an end in this world. Her body was not processing food, and she was slowly starving to death.
I said, all right, Lord, I trust in you. If this is it, it's been 22 years of a gift.
As the Lindberghs brought their daughter home from the hospital for the last time, they decided the days before Courtney's death would be filled with life.
So we brought her home, and we began 3 months, the most beautiful, intense 3 months of our life with her. We opened our doors. Anyone that wanted to see her could come see her. There were strangers that I had met through the internet that showed up on my front lawn. May we come in and spend time with her.
People continue to pour in with prayers, drawn to Courtney's model of holiness, right until the very end.
On December 27, 2014, at 1:51 a.m. on the feast of St. John the Beloved, she took her last breath. She simply exhaled in my arms with a smile on her face. Then the hard part came, because when you spent 22 years every day for 22 years, 24 hours a day, physically caring for someone, and then they're simply gone, there's a huge void that's left.
And nearly 4 years later, though they miss their daughter every day, the Lindberghs know that Courtney's mission is now theirs.
That is her legacy of love, is God does not make mistakes. She had every ability she needed to do the job he needed her to do. If she had everything she needed, and she has what the world thinks is so much less than what you or I might have, then what is our excuse?
Thank you, Lindbergh family, for opening up your home and heart to us. We now bring you the powerful story of how pro-life leader David Bereit recently came home to Rome.
I think that David is just an incredible witness. He is truly a holy man.
Margaret Bereit might just be a modern-day St. Monica. After 28 years of faithful prayer, her husband David entered the Catholic Church this past Easter Vigil.
And everything about this Easter Vigil could not have been more perfect. I can't describe the joy. I've never felt that kind of joy in my whole life. It was perfect.
The pro-life movement better knows David Bereit as the founder and former CEO of 40 Days for Life, the global prayer and fasting campaign outside of abortion facilities. Coming into communion with the Catholic Church was something this former Presbyterian discerned for years.
There were three things that really led to my ultimately feeling led to enter into the Catholic Church. Number one was hearing God calling me consistently, particularly through an hour of adoration. The second thing was the faithful witness that my Catholic wife and Catholic children lived out right before my eyes, which attracted me. And third was getting to work alongside so many Catholic Christians who make up the pro-life movement and watching their witness and their example, and I wanted what they had.
While still discerning, Bereit would sometimes jump on the phone with well-known theologian and Catholic convert Scott Hahn as he grappled with questions about the faith. Bereit would also attend Mass every Sunday with his family and regularly go to adoration, which is where, at his home parish in Fredericksburg, Virginia, he decided to take the leap.
His not being Catholic was a surprise to me. When I arrived here, it took me several months to learn that he wasn't Catholic because he was so faithful and he was there. And eventually I noticed, I said, wait a minute, there's one thing missing, and that's communion.
With his wife as his sponsor and St. John Paul II as his confirmation saint, David was received into the Catholic Church this past Easter Vigil at St. Mary of the Immaculate Conception. The church's pastor, Father John Moseman, sees Bereit's journey as part of a tapestry of grace, with all the threads of his life coming together.
When we're all together in the Lord and rejoicing, we're going to see how his work in the pro-life ministry, how his interactions with regular, everyday Catholics and everyone throughout the world have been an instrument of grace in bringing him home to full union.
The 40 Days for Life founder cites the church's teaching on life for helping him cross the Tiber.
This church that throughout all of its history has been consistent on its teachings and its practices supporting the sanctity of human life. The faith tradition that I was raised in, unfortunately that denominational body has taken positions that are not supportive of human life. And that started to cause me to question and ask why. Why is this happening when it's such a clear message in the gospel and in scripture?
David Bereit is in fact one of many pro-life leaders who has converted to Catholicism. Marjorie Dannenfelser, president of the pro-life Susan B. Anthony list, is also a convert and a friend of David's. His recent yes to the church still stirs up strong emotions as she recalls that day.
I called him and said, "Oh my gosh, I'm so happy. Such great news." And he was happy too. And he said, "Margaret, she's here. You know, she's St. Margaret. She's standing right next to me."
Every time we go up as a family to receive communion, I feel like I'm sort of having an out-of-body experience. Like I'm looking down myself going, is this really happening? For 28 years, this didn't happen. Is this really occurring? This is so cool.
A gift to his family. David Bereit says his conversion is also a gift to his life-affirming work.
There are so many additional graces that I did not previously have. The grace is coming from the sacrament of reconciliation, the grace is coming from communion, the grace is coming from the sacrament of confirmation. And so all of that has given me a greater peace, a greater conviction, and greater courage to take this pro-life movement and to take this beautiful faith that we have and share it as far and as wide as I possibly can.
We are grateful for all the work David Bereit has done for the pro-life movement, and now we're grateful to have him as a brother in the Catholic Church. When we come back, a family shares their gratitude for their adoption journey. Stay tuned as our EWTN Pro-Life Weekly Thanksgiving Special continues after this break. Welcome back to our special Thanksgiving edition of EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. I'm Catherine Hadro. We now introduce you to a man whose parents prayed for years to conceive a child, and when they did, were pressured by doctors to abort him. Carlos Antonio Ibe was born prematurely and blind, but his parents praise God for his life, and you likely will too after hearing his story. This is no ordinary concert hall. It's a home. And this is no ordinary musician. Carlos Alberto Ibe has overcome a significant obstacle to share his talents with the world. After trying to have a baby for 10 years, Carmencita and Roman Ibe were thrilled to learn they were pregnant, but doctors didn't share their optimism.
I was very sick. See, that's why the doctor said, advised me to abort him because they were afraid I might die. And it's the baby that is causing my blood pressure to rise, to be high. But I said he was not doing anything. Just leave him alone, because he was not doing anything. And then they told me, we're afraid that if he's born and he was premature, he will be like a vegetable and you will have more problems. I said, he's not doing anything, just leave him alone. So I'm glad they did.
Rejecting doctors' pressure to abort, the Ibays welcomed their son Carlos Alberto, who goes by Chucky, into the world. But being 3 months premature, Chucky weighed in at just over 1 pound and had retinal detachment, meaning he was blind. Born with a disability, his parents were grateful he was born at all. They watched him grow stronger and healthier, and when he was 2, watched in awe as their miracle son showed to be something of a child prodigy.
I discovered my interest to play the piano when I was 2 years old. You see, we had a small organ in the house, and I went up to it, and without looking for the notes, I just played a perfect rendition, according to my parents, of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star.
I noticed Chucky start walking and went to the organ. And that's when I caught. I said, what is he doing there? So I took a film of him, so you could see that in the video. And then he made it and started to explore his hands on the keys. And that's when he started feeling everything. I heard that twinkle, twinkle. I said, oh, no. He must have done this maybe when we're not around or something. I told my wife, look what he's doing. And that's the start.
It was the start of what would become Chucky's passion and livelihood. The blind Catholic musician travels the world as an accomplished concert pianist and singer.
I've played, of course, in Italy, some parts of Italy, Spain, Russia, and I was blessed to play in Cuba.
His talents have reached the stages of New York's Carnegie Hall, to performance centers in 5 continents overall. He's been able to speak the language of every country in which he's performed. In addition to English,
hello, everybody.
Chucky speaks 7 languages: French,
Bonjour tout le monde.
German,
Guten Tag, meine Damen und Herren.
Italian,
Buongiorno, signori e signore.
Spanish,
Buenos días, señoras y señores.
Russian,
Здравствуйте, дамы и господа.
Japanese,
Konnichiwa-san.
and Portuguese.
Boa tarde, senhoras e senhores.
But he's most fluent in music, which is what brought him to the Vatican and to meeting 2 popes, including a saint.
I told him to ask the Holy Father if he could pray that he could see. Never even ask anything about the sight.
When he approached me, we embraced, he gave me a rosary, and I told him that I would like to be a fisher of men with my music. When I met Pope John Paul, St. John Paul now, since I love Chopin, I told him that I would like for him to pray for me to be the second Chopin.
John Paul II is one of the many saints Chucky has come to know and love.
I have a devotion to St. Cecilia. St. Cecilia is the patroness of music, and I have kindly asked her to be my piano teacher. I've also developed a strong devotion to St. Anthony. St. Anthony is now my most trusted voice teacher.
As Chucky leans on his heavenly teachers, his parents say his extraordinary life is a lesson of faith in and of itself.
When I found out that he was blind, of course I was devastated. I was really, really disheartened because I thought God was punishing me. I said, what have I done that you have done this? So I was telling the priest, and the priest said, why do you think the Lord is punishing you? Why don't you think that the Lord is hugging you and wanting you to be for Him alone? And that's why He gave you this. When He gave you something, remember, He will never leave you alone. And it's true. He never left us alone. Every time you will see the hand of God in everything that we do.
With the saints by his side, Chucky brings his gifts to concert halls around the globe and back to the one who gave them to him. And finally, most little kids don't get a presidential shout out, but for the Alexander family, that was just one experience and a journey filled with life, loss, and a lot of guidance from the Holy Spirit. Here's their story of gratitude for life.
She is full of incredible energy, spirit, and talent.
Most people will never be recognized by the President of the United States.
Come on up here, Kathy. Come on.
Especially not most 4-year-olds.
She'll be president someday.
For the president to call Catherine up was a shock.
President Donald Trump's recent mention of Catherine Alexander's adoption story at the Susan B. Anthony List Gala simply scratched the surface of what this Maryland family has to share. Already biological parents to 2 daughters and 2 sons, Bruce and Lisa Alexander first considered adoption after their youngest was born. But it wasn't until the 2012 March for Life when the Catholic couple decided to act.
Speaking about adoption, and I wanted to know what he thought about it. And that was the same time that he said, you know, I was thinking the same thing. From then on, the Spirit was with us.
The fact that things lined up as quickly as they did, and what were typical sort of, I don't want to call them obstacles, but typical delays, or where the process normally drags on or gets held up, we didn't experience that.
The middle-aged parents recognized they were getting a later start than most other adoptive mothers and fathers.
That would have been when I was turning 50. And we thought that that was a good age to kind of make a break between the infancy program and go to the early child program. So January 14th of 2014, we had come to the decision that maybe we should make that switch.
The same day the Alexanders made that decision, the adoption agency gave them a call.
She told me, she goes, I know you're interested in maybe switching, but I'd like to tell you that we have a baby girl. Neither one of us needed to take any time. No. You know, we were like, we knew that God had just placed this, you know, girl. Even at that point, we thought that this was the child that was for our family.
Even at the call, it was intuitively obvious we were being called.
Up until that point, the Alexanders were expecting to adopt a boy. The fact it was a little girl ready for adoption instead was what they saw as a sign from above. In 2009, the couple's oldest daughter, Cody, was riding her bike home when she was hit by a car. 5 days later, Cody died at the age of 16.
Our older daughter, who is with Jesus, in heaven, is who I prayed to, and the Blessed Mother. And I had a feeling that Cody had something to do with bringing this little girl to our family.
That little girl, though, was born facing an increasingly common challenge, an addiction to opiates.
Her mother, her birth mother, was addicted to Oxycontin.
The adoption agency assured the Alexanders Catherine was weaned off her addiction during her time in the hospital.
Initially, I'm not going to say it was one of fear, or it was more of, that was just not one that had ever at least crossed my mind.
The adoption agency did advise or suggest that we call our pediatrician to see if, what they had to say about it. So I did, and what their response was is that there simply just isn't the research. We just thought that we would be provided for.
Yeah.
If Catherine needed something that, later on in life that was tied with, this addiction, that we would handle it.
Fast forward to 4 years later, and nothing is slowing little Catherine down.
How many seconds?
Do you go by Kat or Kathy? Do you go by Catherine? What do you prefer?
Peanut.
Chase and Brandon Alexander have fully embraced their big brother roles, from playing baseball.
You ready?
Yeah.
Pay attention.
Good job.
To tackling the playground.
I wasn't swinging that high until I was in about 7th grade. Remember?
These teenagers say their much younger sister brings a renewed energy into their home.
A lot of the new creativity comes from her. Like, what are some of the things you like to do with us?
Goof around with you.
Yeah, we like to goof around, tell jokes, and play.
And wrestle.
And wrestle.
Yeah, lots of wrestle.
Who wins that one?
Me.
Really?
Of course.
I don't know how she does it, but...
With Catherine comes laughter.
What's it taste like?
Strawberry.
Strawberry. Oh.
That's familiar to this family.
It was the wittiness, I thought, that both Catherine and my older sister Cody had, that they share, which is really just sort of those, not such cracking a joke, but more of like the comment at the right time. That is kind of, that you wouldn't expect from a 4-year-old, but just kind of fits in right with it.
It's not coincidence. It's not coincidence.
Yeah. I have always believed that Catherine was heavenly sent, that both Cody and God, if you knew Cody, she definitely had her way with deciding who was going to come to our family. But I do think that she just was heavenly sent.
From loss,
there have been some tough times in our family, and but God has always been there.
To new life.
Ow. Running back.
The Alexander family can see God's plan at play. I'm so thankful the Alexander family shared how God has worked in their life with all of us. And as we end our special Thanksgiving edition of EWTN Pro-Life Weekly, please know I'm also so thankful to you for joining. And I'd love to hear from you before next week's show. Email me at prolifeweekly@ewtn.com or like my public page on Facebook so we can keep this pro-life conversation going. Remember, life is a gift. Your life is a gift. God bless.